When you witness a family member or a loved one or a dear friend get injured, there is a feeling that overcomes you. It's a feeling of sympathy for their pain that they have undergone and the pain that they are undergoing, but it's also a feeling of panic. Panic because you don't know what to do to help them, you don't know what to do to make them better, and you don't know what to do to get them to a place where they will be okay. Hello, my name is Nico, and this is my senior thesis. Introducing a basic emergency medical education to a broader spectrum of society will lower human fatality rates correlated with limited access to first aid by increasing the density of available trained individuals. If we want to talk about where this project began, I guess we have to go back about 10 years. When I was little, I had a very intense head injury that was the result of a sledding accident in my own backyard, and I ended up being in the hospital for about a week. And then when I was 16, I got hit by a car while I was biking to school, and I ended up in the emergency room again. So with both of these instances, I ended up needing emergency medical care, and so with this year when it came around and I had to choose something to research and something to develop a project off of, I figured I could make the world, not the entire world, but our little world here, a safer place. So I decided to develop a first aid curriculum for Renaissance School that could be taught over the course of 3 arts practicums. So, my project. I started off the year by doing research into the emergency medical services, or EMS. So there are 2 organizations that sort of govern the world of emergency medical services. The first one is the Department of Transportation / National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The reason that the DOT is in charge of EMS, which I'm sure it's puzzling some of you, is because back in the 60s and 70s when motor vehicle accidents started becoming more and more prevalent and people were dying readily due to car accidents, there was a sudden need for trained individuals to be in the field administering first aid. And so because most of the accidents were happening on highways, and most of the instances where people were needed was on highways, it sort of just fell under the umbrella by chance of the Department of Transportation. The NFPA is in charge of making regulations to keep EMS people safe when they are entering dangerous situations. So let's say that there is a car that is on fire and you have someone who is injured inside the car. The process by which you go getting that person out of the car is strictly outlined by the NFPA in order to minimize your personal risk while maximizing the likelihood of the victim's survival. I interviewed this year the assistant chief, or Chief Lang, at the East Ravenna Volunteer Fire Company, where I'm a volunteer firefighter. He really liked my project, and he had a few things to say about that, but I will touch on that later. And then for the development of my project, I got certified in wilderness first aid, and prior to taking the certification course, I actually obtained the material myself and modified it, rearranged it, and edited it in order to develop the curriculum for the Renaissance School first aid class. So, first off, my interview. Assistant Chief Lang. Chief Lang works for the government, but he volunteers and works for it. He has been an EMT for about 10 years, and he has been the head EMS officer at the East Ravenna Volunteer Fire Company for about 3 years. When I told him about my project and when I showed him my work, he was very enthusiastic about it. He really liked the idea. He thinks that everybody should know CPR. CPR is one of those certifications that it's really easy to get. You take it once and then you only have to use it once in order to validate the initial process of going through the certification. He also thinks it would be best if everybody was an EMT, but that is a lot of time to devote to getting a certification and not everybody has that luxury. I should mention, in the photo, he's the guy standing behind me in the vest. That this is the only photo that I have of him, so I apologize for that. And next, my research. So at the beginning of the year, I looked into the history of emergency medical services, and I looked into the governmental agencies that regulate emergency medical services. And this is what I found. So there is a rank, sort of the EMS providers in the United States. First off, at the bottom is the basic EMT, or EMTB. These individuals are trained specifically in patient assessment. So they are trained in knowing sort of everything that could potentially go wrong with a patient and finding out what the actual problem is. And then their job is to take that information that they have found and hand it off to the advanced EMTs, or EMTAs. These individuals have the same assessment training as basic EMTs, however, they have more pharmaceutical knowledge and more physical training as far as emergency procedures that they can perform for the patients. Both of these certifications, EMT Basic and EMT Advanced, are state regulated. So the certifications and the different hour requirements for these two certifications vary from state to state. For example, in Virginia, only advanced EMTs are capable of administering Narcan, which is it's an anti-opiate. So if someone is having an opiate overdose, the advanced EMTs will administer the Narcan in order to counteract the effects of the opiate within the system. And it's actually pretty incredible. The person goes from completely non-responsive to awake and alert over the course of about 5 minutes. But basic EMTs used to be able to administer that in Virginia, and now they cannot, whereas in other states they still can. And then the national level certification is paramedics. Paramedics are those badasses that fly around in helicopters and pull you out of sketchy situations and save your life no matter what. They are trained in what's called advanced life support. So they will do everything that is known to the medical world in order to keep you alive no matter what your injury was. So if you had a heart attack and you're still alive when they arrive, it's the paramedics that are going to keep you alive. If you've been shot, it's the paramedics that are going to keep you alive. They are the ones, it's the hardest certification to get that's non-specialized, and it is held, it's a national standard that all EMTs, all paramedics, across the country are held to that bar. So all of those rules, as I said, all those rules and requirements for training are held by the DOT/NHTSA. And then the NFPA, they are the ones in charge of the regulations for dangerous situations, but also requirements for how fast you get out of the building and regulated response times. So the way you conduct yourself in the field is regulated by the NFPA. So for my project. This year, I got certified in wilderness first aid. It was a 20-hour certification course that I did over the course of a weekend, and I did it quite recently, actually. The problem with doing it so recently is that if I had just done my project after getting the certification, I would not have had the time to fully develop the project and the curriculum for my senior thesis. So I had to acquire the material prior to taking the class and teach myself all of it and then go from there. So what I did was I took the entire curriculum, I read it, and all of the material that was focused mainly on wilderness first aid, emphasis on wilderness, I cut out. And so what was left was 3 sections: patient assessment, musculoskeletal injuries, and soft tissue damage. If those statements don't make sense, just hang on, I promise I will explain them. So, particularly with patient assessment, within the wilderness first aid course, there wasn't enough material, so I actually had to go and expand on it in order for there to be enough of it to mirror sort of what EMTs do today. And then, I am personally more of a doer learning, like physical learning, so I incorporated a practical portion into the curriculum. So all of the skills that are taught to you, there is actually time set aside within the class in order for you to practice them. and I will go into more detail on that later. So, bumps in the road. Initially, this was not going to be my project. At the beginning of the year, I wanted to become an EMT and take the material from that certification and design a curriculum from there. However, due to an anomaly, I did not make it into the fall EMT class, which was fine because it gave me more than enough time to research on the history of EMS and find out all about the DOT/NHTSA and the NFPA. And it gave me time to write my paper, which was nice. So then I signed up for the class in January, and there were 2 classes. But unfortunately, due to low attendance, the class was canceled. And the other class was overfilled, so I could not be transferred into that one either. So, third time's a charm, I had to find a different way to get certified in order to be competent in the material I would be developing the curriculum on. So, I went the route of wilderness first aid. The wilderness first aid course that I took is developed by Solo Wilderness Medical Schools. It is a school that was started in the 1970s with the intention of creating curriculums to train individuals to give care to people who are in remote locations and hours or days away from hospitals. So it's prolonged, simple, I guess, life support. The local organization that actually teaches the material developed by Solo schools is MEDIC. So MEDIC Solo is sort of a, oh my goodness, Sana, what's wrong? Sana, oh no! Quick, somebody tell me, what should we do? What should we do? Matu, what do I do?
See if anything's constricting her airway.
Close, but not quite. Benji, what are we doing? What are we doing? Tell me, tell me.
Check her pulse.
It's a good idea, but it's not where you want to start. Mercedes? No? No? Okay. Does anybody have any idea where we need to begin with this?
Check her breath.
No. The first thing that we need to do when we have someone who has collapsed or injured is we need to remain calm. We need to be focused and present in order to provide quality care for the patient. If I am not 100%, then I am not going to be able to give 100% of myself to Sana and give her quality care. And I will, in all likelihood, end up hurting myself in the process of giving her care, which will result with 2 patients and no one getting anywhere instead of 1 patient getting somewhere to where they're going to get better. This is a very, very accurate demonstration as to why a curriculum like this is valid in a school in general, and particularly in a school like this. Obviously, Sana is fine. Thank you very much. So as I was saying, MEDIC. MEDIC is a program that is run locally by an individual named Matt Rozewski. He has all of the certifications obtainable by Solo Wilderness Medicine Schools, and he does a lot of work setting up triage centers in remote locations. He's actually what they call a geomedic. So he goes into he worked a lot in Haiti after the earthquake, just building like field hospitals and having people being taken care of there. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Renaissance School's emergency medicine class. In this class was specifically developed to be taught over the course of 3 arts practica. It's broken down into 3 sections, the first one being patient assessment, the second one being musculoskeletal injuries, and the third one being soft tissue damage. So, patient assessment. In the first class, you will learn about how to find out what is wrong with the person who is injured. You will also learn about the different methods of infection, about bacteria, bacterial life, how quickly they multiply, how it can be dangerous, and importantly, how to protect yourself from infection. A sample from this class that is important is learning your ABCDs. ABCD is a very easy to remember acronym that will help you go through the assessment process of a patient, addressing the issues that are most dangerous first and least dangerous last. So, A, B, C, D. A stands for airway. If the airway is not open, a patient is not going to be able to get air in and out of their lungs, and they will expire relatively quickly. B stands for breathing. If your patient is not breathing, again, you don't have the air going in and out of their lungs, and the likelihood of expiration is also quite high. C stands for circulation. Breathing swimming is where you would check the pulse. So, if the patient's heart is not beating and the blood is not circulating throughout their entire body, then again, the likelihood that they expire is relatively high. So once you have addressed all of these issues and you've checked to make sure that their airway is open, they're breathing, and they have good circulation, this is when you move on to D. D is the grotesque one of deformities. If something is bent the way it's not supposed to be, or oozing in a certain manner that it really shouldn't be, this is where you address that. D are issues that aren't immediately life-threatening, but if left unattended, they will become life-threatening. In the second class, you learn all about musculoskeletal injuries. Musculoskeletal is the structure of your body, so it's the bones and the cartilage. So in this class, you learn about sprains, strains, fractures, splinting, and another acronym, RICE. There's so many acronyms, it's unbelievable. RICE, and then spinal injuries. So sprains and strains, you learn, and fractures, you learn how to identify those different injuries. And then RICE is rest, ice, compression, and elevation. That is the treatment method for all sprains and strains. And then splinting is what you do for fractures. So in order to minimize furthering the damage of a fractured bone, you want to splint it in place in order to prevent any movement. The most important part of the musculoskeletal injury class is doing a spinal check. So learning how to do a spine assessment is incredibly important. If, say for example, if someone were to injure their neck up here in between C1 and C7, which are the top 7 vertebrae in your spine, that part of the spinal cord is the part that controls your diaphragm. So if you were to break one of the vertebrae in there and then a bone shard was to head into your spinal cord, it would sever that part of the spinal cord, your diaphragm would relax, and it would never contract again. So it's very important to do a spinal check if you ever suspect that someone has hurt their back. And you will learn all about that in the second class of the Renaissance School of First Aid class. In the third class, you learn all about soft tissue injuries. This is the one that is the most gory out of all of them. So you're learning how to manage bleeding and stopping bleeding. So you will cover blood vessels, soft tissue injuries, pressure dressings, allergic reactions, and shock. So with soft tissue injuries, they come in all shapes and sizes. You can have abrasions where you scrape the top layer of the skin off. You can have avulsions where you cut yourself in such a way that there's a flap of skin that's loose. Lacerations are your standard cut, and then there are many more, but I don't need to go into the detail about those. The most important part of the third class is learning about blood vessels. I'm sure that all of you remember from middle school biology learning about arteries and veins and capillaries. But in case you don't remember all of the purposes that they serve, here's a quick refresher. Arteries are pressurized blood vessels that carry the oxygenated blood throughout your entire body. So if you remember from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when the guy has his arm chopped off, come back here, I'll bite your legs off. So that spurting that it did, it's not actually that dramatic, but there is definitely that pulsing from the heart beating. You can witness that with a cut artery. If there is an artery that is cut, The only way to stop the bleeding due to it being pressurized is by applying digital pressure. So you actually have to reach in there and pinch that bad boy closed until someone can sew it. Veins are the blood vessels that carry the deoxygenated blood away from all of your body tissues into your lungs and heart in order to be reoxygenated. They are not pressurized, so a simple application of pressure on a cut vein will allow your body to form the clot, and you can go from there. Capillaries are the itty-bitty blood vessels in your body that allow for the nutrients in the blood and the oxygen in the blood to be transferred from the blood cells into the tissue cells. Capillaries are only wide enough to fit a single blood cell through them at a time, and so when you cut a capillary, just a simple application of pressure allows for a quick scab to form, a quick clot, excuse me. So, in conclusion, this year I researched the history of EMS. I found out all about the Department of Transportation / National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the National Fire Protection Association. I interviewed the Assistant Chief Lang of the East Ravenna Volunteer Fire Company, who is the head EMS officer there. And I developed a first aid curriculum based off of the certification that I got, which was a wilderness first aid certification. Thank you for your time. I will now take the questions. Yes, Nico.
So you said that like you took the wilderness first aid class and then you sort of edited the material to fit like a basic first aid class.
Yes.
So is there anything that like wasn't in the wilderness first aid that would be relevant to like first aid in school?
Primarily the assessment. I was kind of underwhelmed by the minimal material that was in the assessment part of the class. So as I mentioned, I had to ask Chief Lang about that and to give me more material on patient assessment. There was also like simple things like paper cuts. Like you definitely have to clean those out, and it didn't mention those at all in the wilderness first aid class. Any other questions? Sana.
Okay, do you expect this curriculum to be mandatory or not? Because assuming some people are kind of with the spreading blood and everything.
I should say that this curriculum is a hypothetical. There is no way that what I have done here would ever actually be taught in Renaissance School. It's unethical because I developed this curriculum. It hasn't not been checked by any medical authority except for Chief Lang. He liked it, but he's not like an authorized body to release that sort of material. So I guess don't worry about it. Any other questions? Hello.
Earlier you mentioned the, I think it was EMT A and B.
Yes.
So you said that the B aren't allowed to, they're not allowed to administer that.
Narcan.
Yeah. Do you know why that is and who decides that?
That was a decision that was made by legislation. That's all I know. Apparently there was an incident where several EMTs didn't have enough training hours, and they missed the section on Narcan, and they administered it to someone who was not overdosing on opiates, and somehow that turned into now all basic EMTs cannot administer Narcan. All right, thank you for your time.